بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing our lessons on the fiqh and the rulings of marriage, which we began before Ramadan, before pausing for the blessed month. And now, by the permission of Allah, and to Him belongs all praise, we continue in our study, insha'Allah ta'ala. We stopped last on the discussion about the ahkam, the rulings of the aqdun nikah, the marriage contract. And we spoke about the conditions, the pillars, the procedure. We also spoke about the rulings pertaining to who takes the place, who's the wali, the guardian, who can take his place in terms of if the father is not present, etc. And we concluded last by discussing the time and the place of the marriage contract, i.e. what's the recommended time, which is the blessed month of Shawwal, which we're in right now. And we also mentioned that getting married, the ruling on getting married online or via the internet or the phone or the likes. Now, inshallah, at this stage, the person, once they've completed the aqdun nikah, once they've completed the marriage contract, it is now permissible for them to engage in that which a husband and wife they engage in, i.e. they become legally husband and wife after aqdun nikah. However, the Islamic law suggests and teaches us the sunnah. In fact, there's a discussion, as we'll get to later, about the ruling on the walima, the wedding banquet. But the process after the aqdun nikah, after the contract, the marriage contract is completed, both the man and woman, the male and the female, bride and the groom, they become legally, legally they are married. However, it's from the practice of the Prophet ﷺ and his instructions that once they have done the aqdun nikah, the contract, marriage contract, they proceed then to the walima. And the walima is the wedding banquet, which the purpose of it is to announce the marriage to the public and to invite the families and the friends and the public, the poor and the rich, in order to celebrate this blessing and to thank Allah for it. Inshallah, we'll talk about the walima and its rulings next week. In between that stage, because once you go from the marriage contract, the next step then is the walima, the wedding banquet, to which then after that typically people move in together. It means the husband and wife, the bride and the groom, they move in together, begin their life together. So there are stages. But we want to focus on the period before that. And what do I mean by that is before the walima and after the aqd nikah, what happens at that stage? Because it is permissible in Islam and a common practice amongst many that there is a gap between the three. Usually after aqd nikah, some people may do the walima immediately or upon the same day, which is permissible. Others may delay it. And this is what the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he would do. He would have the aqd nikah, and some days later, 3 days later, and the likes, he would have the walima, to which then the procedure moving in occurs. It is also permissible to separate between the aqd nikah, the marriage contract, and the walima, and moving in. And the example again, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in the hadith Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha fi al-Bukhari wa Muslim, she says the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam married me when I was 6 years old, and then consummated the marriage at 9, and this point of the 3-year gap, here Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he moved in and consummated the marriage at 9 when she was 9, i.e. 3 years after the aqd was completed, which shows us that it is permissible to have a gap between those two processes. The same way is also permissible for the bride and the groom, once they complete the aqd, to spend some time, whatever is easy for them, in preparation for the walima, because the walima costs money and it needs preparation, and so it's permissible. In fact, this is what many of the Salaf would do. Once the aqd was done, some time would pass before the walima, and a prime example of that also is the marriage of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu to Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, and it's mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari that once Ali married radiallahu ta'ala anhu Fatima, he spent some time before the walima earning some money through business in order to make enough money for the walima, as he said and narrated himself radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So this in-between time period is something which is permissible and is a reality for many in preparation for the next stages. But what I want to talk about now is a mas'ala, an issue that's coming up nowadays in our society, and it is growing amongst the millennials, right? The generation of young people. And that is the concept of signing a prenuptial agreement or instituting a prenup or prenuptial agreement prior to the marriage or at the beginning of the marriage. And the reason why I'm getting into this, because the aqdun nikah we already spoke about, shar'an, is a must in order for them to get married. But in today's time, this practice is growing amongst the millennials specifically, and also it's unique to the wealthier. And people ask then, what is the hukm shar'i, the Islamic ruling, legislative ruling on this practice of prenuptial agreements or prenups? So inshallah, I want to discuss this issue before moving on to the next topic. And the way I will talk about it is, what is a prenup? Why are people doing it? And what does Islamic law say about it? And the reason why people should know about this is that there are positives and there are negatives to this type of practice. Firstly, we begin with the definition. A prenuptial agreement is an agreement made between two people before marrying that establishes the rights to property and support in the event of divorce or death. So I repeat, and this is a definition from a dictionary definition. A prenuptial agreement is an agreement made between two people before marrying that establishes rights to property and support in the event of divorce or death. So it's a agreement that the husband and wife, they sign, or the potential couple prior to the marriage, in order to sort out their assets. Who gets what upon a divorce or death. This type of agreement of recent is becoming more popular. I would not say it's very popular, because we'll take a look at the numbers, but I will say it's growing. And this type of agreement is usually signed before they get married, and sometimes it's signed at the beginning of the marriage or the likes. Obviously, to ensure that there is some kind of agreement about the assets and the wealth and the finances. Because a husband and wife, from the questions that they should be asking one another, or at the very least agree upon, is how are they going to be living. So from this angle, you could see why some Muslims now are engaging or thinking about this, even though we'll come to the ruling at the end. But when it comes to the wider society, there are a number of reasons why people engage in this. But the idea is, finances before marriage is an important conversation, because a lot of divorce and a lot of marital issues are on account of the issues regarding finances or expectations of living, standard of living, and the likes. Prenups have become popularized by celebrities mainly, and those who have a lot of money or a lot of significant financial assets prior to marriage. The numbers show, and this is important for our own knowledge, that currently in Canada, approximately 8% of Canadian couples, 8% have a prenuptial agreement, according to a 2017 study or poll done by Ipsos, which is a kind of like a survey company. About 8% of Canadians in 2017 have mentioned that they have a prenuptial agreement. So it's by no measure something popular amongst the wider society let alone the Muslims. But lawyers and experts are saying that this practice is growing. And there's a number of reasons why. Because if you look at the definition, in the case there is a divorce, what happens is both couples, they start to debate whose asset is whose. And if they have shared assets or money accrued while married, this is usually where the dispute is. So some of the reasons why millennials, specifically young people of our time, are engaging in prenuptials, even though older people do it too, is the following reasons. Number one, many of the younger people, the millennials, they are staying in school longer. And because they're staying in school longer, they're getting more education. And then number two, they're working longer hours or longer years, and obviously better jobs. Studies have shown, on average, maybe somebody will be in the workforce for 30 to 40 years. SubhanAllah. So that's the second one. Thirdly, people nowadays, young people, are earning more money than ever before, especially prior to marriage. And a practice, again, not for Muslims, but non-Muslims, is that they cohabit, right? Cohabiting, living together, longer before they get married. Then the non-Muslims are engaging in this practice of living together before marriage, so they need to then protect their finances in case they don't get married. But the idea is here that many Muslims, or maybe including the first part, which is that they're earning more money than before getting married. People are getting married later, and when they're coming into the marriage, they have more money than before. Another point, so this is fourthly, inheritance. And this is a very important one. Young people, a lot of them are inheriting intragenerational wealth, which is wealth they got from their parents and grandparents. And because their parents or grandparents are very wealthy or wealthier, because a lot of them come from the baby boomers or those earlier generations, they have a lot of wealth. And that means then some of the young people are potentially going to inherit a lot of money, or businesses sometimes, or entire estates, which means before they're getting married or upon their marriage, they may become significantly wealthier. And therefore, to protect their generational assets, they need an agreement so that the potential wife or a spouse, husband, doesn't take it from them or manipulate it, or maybe they don't want it losing the family name, whatever. Lastly, the divorce rate. And this is from those things very important for all of us, because we all know that divorce is something which is growing. But how big is the issue of divorce in Canada? Interestingly, I found a 2016 study in Canada, 2016, which seems to be the most up-to-date of the stats I could find, even though the other stats, but this is amongst those stats that I found. And I'm sure there's more relevant ones. But in 2016, there were 6 divorces per 1,000 married women. 6 divorces per 1,000 married women in Canada. And this is according to the Vanier Institute, Family Institute, right? So it's a leading influencer or institute or think tank for family studies. The Vanier Institute of the Family. طيب, if this is the reality, young people are engaging in this practice of signing prenuptial agreements to protect their assets, and then Muslims are asking, or people are wondering, what's the Islamic take on that? Because the hukm shar'i, we know, is dependent on what Islam teaches us about assets upon divorce, which we'll get to in a minute. But because we're on the topic of divorce, and even though we're talking about marriage and discussion, not divorce, it's probably good to talk about how big of an issue is divorce for Canadian Muslims. And this is important because the divorce rate in North America for Muslims is actually not very clear. Most people and most imams and most masajid, or you might call them as community leaders, they always report a higher level of divorce than previous years. But the studies show that there is not a clear measure of exactly how much divorce is happening. And to give you an idea, there's a study done in 2017 by Pew Research in America that found, and it was a very small study, but still, it found 8% of those they surveyed reported being divorced or separated. Just 8%. And while that sounds like a small number, if we said just a minute ago, in Canada, it's 6 per 1,000. You could imagine that if America it's 8%, Canadians' divorce is much lower. The reason why, according to the Vanier Institute, is because very few people nowadays are getting married compared to the past. It's very important to contextualize. Very few people are getting married compared to before. And number two, those who are getting married, a lot of those communities are more prone to keeping the marriage working. However, I found that there is actually one quantitative study, one big one, that's probably the most popular one, but it's kind of outdated. It's a quantitative study done in the year 2002 by a researcher named Bayunis, Muslim researcher named Bayunis. And he found in his study in America, it's okay, Dr. Ilyas Bayunis, it was done in America, not here. But he found that Muslims in North America over the previous 10 years, from 1992 to 2002, the divorce rate stood at 32% compared to 51% divorce rate in the general population. So his research found that Muslims divorce less than the non-Muslims, which I believe is something which as Muslims we understand and agree to, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us to reconciliation. وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ, and reconciliation is good. However, his study was a bit confusing and contradictory due to some facts not being, or variables being fixed. Right? There's some kind of discrepancy in his research. Here I'm going to read to you a passage from a book, and whoever is interested in this topic, you can read this book. It's available online. A book written by Julie McFarlane in the year 2012. Her book is called Islamic Divorce in North America, a Sharia Path in Secular Society. And the book talks about how are Muslims dealing with marriage and divorce from a statistical perspective, and analyzes why Muslims get divorced in North America, what are the impacts of divorce, etc. It's an interesting read for those of you who are interested in understanding what's going on. She says on page 142, on the bottom half of that page, what she says then, while no recent studies exist, the rate of divorce among North American Muslims, then she brings all the studies, she goes back to the bottom and says, after she mentions all the different data that is available, while both studies share in common is the observation that the divorce rate in the North American Muslim community is rising sharply. For many families, especially those originating from South Asia, where divorce was a rare and generation ago, this is a huge change. Every imam, therapist, and social worker whom I asked about the divorce rate in their communities believed that it was rising significantly. Of particular concern are divorce rates among younger people. An online survey conducted for an Islamic organization in 2009, it's a bit old, but still, found that 1/3 of the marriages which ended in divorce lasted 5 years or less. In my study, more than half the marriages that ended in divorce lasted 5 years or less, with 23% lasting just or less than 1 year. 23% lasting less than 1 year. طيب, what's the point of reading all of this? The point is, a lot of people anticipating the possibility of divorce, they then turn to prenuptial agreements in order to preemptively stop a loss of assets. Can you imagine? Many people now, and this is one of the problems with these agreements, is that they anticipate that the marriage won't last, therefore try to set a contract in case it doesn't last, because the data is showing that it's not more likely that it's quite likely it might not last, and therefore we need to be protected. However, what exactly is a prenuptial agreement? Because some people may say, what goes inside that agreement? According to our Canadian law, Ontario, if you go to the Ontario Family Law Act, it states in Section 52, marriage contracts between two persons who are married to each other or intend to marry may enter into an agreement in which they agree on their respective rights, and any mentions the following things: rights and obligations on the marriage or on separation, on the annulment or dissolution of the marriage, or on a death, including ownership in or division of the property. 2. B. Support obligations. C. The right to direct the education and moral training of their children, but not the right to decision-making responsibilities or parenting time with respect to their children. And D. Any other matter in the settlement of their affairs. You can find this online. What is it saying there? It's allowed in Canadian law for two people to sign, means the husband and wife or a couple, to sign these agreements in order to dictate upon divorce who gets what asset, how much support one spouse is supposed to give to the other, how they're going to raise and train their children, and anything else they're settling. And the reason why I'm mentioning all of this, and again, some people may ask, what's all these details, brother? The reason is, we need to understand what the law and the wada', the climate of our society is now. Because in Islam, these issues are dealt with fi sharia, in the legislation, and then there's the reality, which is what happens if someone did divorce. So then let me explain then. In this Canadian society, if somebody, husband and wife, they got divorced after they got married, one of the number one things that happens is that both they keep their personal assets. However, shared personal assets, i.e. money accrued during their marriage, either together or from one spouse who is taking care of the other, is split 50-50. I.e. the assets that they accrued or they shared during the marriage, 50-50. On top of that, and so it's important if they have that shared assets. This is not wife support, spousal support or alimony. This is just the assets they might have accrued if they were business owners together or whatever it is. They had a joint account of wealth together, etc., which was not independent or separated. Then, on top of that, spousal support, which is paid in the following manner. This is what I want to highlight, because in our Sharia, we do have something called spousal support. I'm going to mention it in a second. But this issue here we don't have, which is this. In Canadian law, it states that when it comes to spousal support in Ontario, not including child support, it's 1.5% to 2% multiplied by the number of years of marriage or cohabitation, which is then multiplied by the difference between the spouse's gross income for each year of the marriage or cohabitation up to a maximum 50%. So it's a lot of numbers there. They give the mithal, the following example. Imagine they say if a husband's income is $100,000 and the wife's $25,000 and they were married for 25 years or more, that means the wife can get 37.5 to 50% of that difference between their wealth. All together comes down to $11,250 a year or to $15,000 a year. Haqiqatan, even what's even more probably interesting and important to take note of is not that only someone might end up paying this much amount of money, is that they have to pay support for 6 months of the year, 6 months to 1 year. So it's either paid half the year or for the whole year. This is the wada' in this society. This is Ontario. The Ontario law. Ontario climate. In the Sharia, do we have any of this? We don't have this. We have something less and different. So therefore, the question now comes back to what's the hukm Sharia on signing a prenup? We have to first understand the people who sign the prenups in Canadian society are trying to bypass these issues. They don't want to either pay this a large amount of spousal support, or they want to divide the assets in a way that they agree upon, so no one can later on go to the courts and try to demand 50-50, or they want to settle the children issue. But in Islamic law, we know that the first thing we know that in Sharia, in our legislation, if there's a divorce, there's already protocols Allah has made as to how the wealth, how spousal support works, or child support, or anything like that. We have this already. Inheritance, all that is there in the Sharia. That's the first thing. And second thing, and even the non-Muslims agree to this, the idea of signing a prenuptial agreement, even though it might have a positive for the person who has a large amount of assets, it can also make the marriage feel uncertain, because coming into the marriage with the signing of a prenup is anticipating or suggesting that there's no trust, and that's the majority of Canadians and the Westerners don't engage in it, because if you're going to get married, you have to have trust one another and not anticipate the worst case scenario. Others, they see it as just in case. But for Sharia, is it allowed, these kind of things? In order to understand the ruling, because I'm going to bring you the ruling now from the ulama. Before we get to the ruling, we should know, in Islam, if a husband and wife divorce irrevocably, it's important, many Muslims, they don't know this, or they might not be clear on this. If they divorce irrevocably, what happens? The ulama say then, it's upon the husband, because in his hand is the nafaqah, to provide his wife what's called mut'atul talaq. Mut'atul talaq is pretty much spousal support, or a spousal or alimony, if you want to use that term, which is mentioned in the Quran and is the opinion of Jumhur ulama. Jumhur ulama. And this is the view of the Ahnaf, the Shafi'iyya and the Hanabila and the Malikiyya. In fact, all four madhabs. وقول بعض السلف. And some even mention ijma', even though there is not necessarily ijma', but it was mentioned by some. And what's the dalil for this? The idea that if they are divorced irrevocably, we're not talking about they're in a state of iddah now. We're talking about the husband and wife divorced, she's no longer his wife, and he can't take her back. Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 236, لا جناح عليكم إن طلقتم النساء ما لم تمسوهن أو تفرضوا لهن فريضة ومتعوهن على الموسع قدره وعلى المقتر قدره متاعا بالمعروف حقا على المحسنين. So this verse in Surah Baqarah, ayah 236. Here, the shahid, the point of reference in the verse is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions there is no blame or sin on you if you make a hint. Allah says there is no sin or blame upon you if you divorce women while you have not had any intimacy with them, or you appointed for them a mahar, but bestow upon them a suitable gift when you're divorcing them. But the rich according to his means and the poor according to his means, a gift of reasonable amount is a duty upon those who are good doers. So this shahid, مَتِّعُوهُنَّ عَلَى الْمُوسِعِ قَدَرُهُ وَعَلَى الْمُقْتِرِ قَدَرُهُ مَتَاعًا بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Here the ulama say this مَتِّعُوهُنَّ, وَمَتِّعُوهُنَّ means give them some kind of gift. This is what the ulama means by the spousal support or the alimony. Lakin, somebody may say, what does that look like in the Sharia? And without getting into too much complication, because we're not talking about ahkam talaq here, we're talking about issues of marriage. It's important to understand it. It's already built into the Sharia by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. But the difference between what Islam teaches and what the Western world dictates, once a man and wife were divorced, husband and wife, irrevocably, she's no longer his husband. Therefore, he's not allowed for him, not required upon him to provide for her indefinitely, because he's no longer the husband. He's no longer the husband. So the ulama, some of them differed and said there is no such thing as what's it called, spousal support. And they argued because Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us one hadith, I believe it was the hadith Fatima radiyallahu ta'ala anha, Fatima bint Qais, when she was divorced, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam told her, or told the woman to inform her, ليس لها سكنى ولا نفقة. She has no housing anymore, accommodation upon her husband owing, no any sustenance. لكن قول راجح, if you want to, قول الجمهور, that's better the wording. قول الجمهور is there is. However, what does that look like? And this is important. Somebody will say, okay, how much does the wife get then? The ulama, the fuqaha, they mentioned there is no tahdeed. There is no tahdeed in miqdar al-mut'ah. There is no specific amount of money or gift that has been legislated, determined in the Sharia for that. And this is found in the discussion in Al-Mawsu'a al-Fiqhiyya, volume 36, page 96 and 97. And to summarize the qawl, the different fuqaha, they mentioned different things, different madhabs. Some said that he should provide for her some clothing. Some they said that he should provide for her a gift according to his means. Some said he can give to her money or wealth up to half of the mahar, and some said less than that, and there's more. But there's no fixed. And on top of that, it's not a continual. It's a one-time thing. And so the ulama, some of them said the final conclusion is as Allah said, that the one who is rich according to his means and the one who is poor according to his means. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is that some Muslims, Wallahu al-Musta'an, if the marriage does not work out, they may think it's correct to go and to ask for alimony or spousal support beyond what the Sharia allows. Because, as I read earlier, in this law, this country, if you're married, and this is important, how long does a husband pay? He says, if a man was married for 25 years or longer, he has to pay the rest of his life, indefinite. So this is again, in Islam, this is not our Sharia. So the bottom line is, with all this being said, our scholars, they examine the issue. And I'm going to read you now the fatwa on the issue of signing such agreements, whether you want to call it a prenuptial agreement or you want to call upon an agreement between husband and wife about their finances after divorce. This is the qarar, the decree of the Majma' al-Fiqhi al-Islami al-Duwali. It's very important. Majma' al-Fiqhi al-Islami al-Duwali, the International Fiqh Academy. What is the International Fiqh Academy? Some of us might not be familiar with them. Al-Majma' al-Fiqhi, there's more than one of them, but this is the one that is international. It's an international Islamic institution consisting of all the Muslim world, all the Muslim countries, are representatives, ulama from all those countries, gathered together in Saudi Arabia or another country, and they deal with contemporary modern issues. It's slightly different than the Majma' al-Fiqhi that's connected to Rabit Islami, the Muslim World League, that used to do its events in Mecca. It's connected, but they're slightly different. They're different majami', different academies. Why am I mentioning this? This is a huge scholarly body. It's big. Like I said, all Muslim countries, they have representatives and scholars from each one. They come together and they do a darasa, a detailed study of these issues. And this is a side benefit for the brothers and sisters. These kind of issues, look who studies them. Look how many scholars gather to study this issue. Sad today in our society, some people talk about masail that are way above their level. Where the ulama, they get together from all the world and get together for a number of days or week just to study one issue to produce a qarar, a decree. So if you ever see a decree that comes from the Majma' al-Fiqhi, just know it's coming from a serious scholarly body, because the scholars praise them. And what is this institution, the one I'm talking about? The International Fiqh Academy is right now, currently, the president is Sheikh Dr. Salih bin Abdullah al-Humaid. Sheikh Salih bin Humaid is a khatib and the imam of Masjid al-Haram, presently alive today, Hafidhullah. And prior to him, the president used to be Dr. Bakr Abu Zayd, Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd, rahimahullah, which all of us are familiar with, his book, the adornment or the ornament for the seeker of knowledge. So this majma', it has a decree, and I'm going to translate it. I'm going to read what I translated from it in brief. They did decree number 227, 11/23, means I don't know if that's a volume number. The title: the effect of marital contracts on the assets of the spouses. This is the qarar. This is the decree. It's called the effect of marital contract on the marital contracts on the assets of the spouses. It was the International Fiqh Academy sat together in Medina al-Munawwara, by the city of the Prophet ﷺ, in the year 1440, so just 2 years ago, in Safar, right, the 13th of Safar till the 19th, for the annual 23rd conference. Here, this is corresponds to October 28th, 2018. Here, the Majma', they said the following, after studying the mas'ala, the issue. They came to the following five conclusions. Number one, both spouses have the right to their individual wealth, and they have the right to use what they own of their own wealth and compensation or donations given to them. Means, the first one, they agree, if the husband and wife, when they get married, whatever they come into the marriage of personal wealth, Yani the money that's their independent wealth, that's their wealth. No one can take it from them. And they have the right to use it however they want. That's the first one. And even the Western law agrees to this. This agreed upon point. Whatever you get married with, the money you come with in your pocket, in your accounts, in assets, that's yours. Second, whatever each spouse has obtained by way of marriage or other than it is considered specific wealth for that person, and it is inherited to their heirs afterwards. It's a very important point here. Unlike in the Western law, where it says whatever that they accrue in marriage is shared, the Majma' said no, whatever has each spouse has obtained by way of marriage, for example, if the husband gave her a mahar, after divorce, you can't 50-50 al-mahar. As Allah tells in Surah An-Nisa, that's all hers, unless she gives it to him out of her goodwill. So very important. See, this is a difference. So Islamic law says whatever they gain by way of marriage, for example, gifts, or the mahar, or whatever it is, anything else, that is the person's individual specific wealth, and they give, when they divorce, the wealth goes to their spouse, their heirs. So the spouse is an heir when they're married, but if they divorce and no longer married, then it goes to her heirs. That's it. It's a very important point, because here in the law here, it says when you divorce 50-50 on that which you gained during the marriage or accrue together, and that's not what the ulama are saying here. Point number 3, if both spouses agree, this is the point I want to highlight. If both spouses, if they agree to distribute their wealth in a certain way, out of the goodwill and voluntarily out of their own goodwill, then there is no legislative preventative against that. And if they want to do their own agreement as to how to divide their assets upon divorce themselves, from their own good hearts and voluntarily, there is no legislative preventative. However, it is not allowed to obligate it on both sides specifically. So they can do this out of their free will, but you're not allowed to make it something which is specific. Then from here we see, if they wanted to sign some type of prenuptial agreement to say that we're going to split some assets this way and we're going to do this for our children from their own selves, that's their right. But to obligate it, not allowed. Fourth, and this is the point also connected, for the wife, if the marital relationship ends due to divorce or khula', and that causes her harm. This is important. This is the conditional statement. For the wife now, if the marital relationship ends due to divorce, that's where that comes from the husband, or khula' comes from the woman, right? And this causes her harm, and what harm here is intended financially, then it is her right to go to the judge, right, a Muslim judge, to request compensation for the harm that occurred to her due to what the wise legislator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, permitted of the mut'atun talaq, the spousal support that happens after divorce, and they're referring to what I just cited earlier in Surah Al-Baqarah. So what are they saying? The ulama are saying here that in the case that she is divorced and there's harm upon her because the husband is taking care of her, and in a situation, let's say she doesn't have much assets, and this is another point of reference, is that in our times today, in this time today, and in general, divorce is one of the biggest reasons for the poverty for some parties in marriage, usually the woman. So it's understandable if she was taken care of by her husband, all of a sudden she has no income, he can give her some kind of gift to keep her, to deflect that harm before she moves on with her life. Lastly, fifthly, that the Majma' calls towards the establishment of public and private institutions to observe the rights of the women who are divorced in order to fulfill their needs. And this is a responsibility that, of course, it's upon the Muslims to provide ways out for our fellow sisters in the case of divorce and inability to provide, or if they have children. Islam also has child support, which is not related to this in the moment. This is taken from the Majma' al-Fiqh al-Duwali, Islami al-Duwali, their website, as you can find it there. I translated. So the bottom line, the ulama here, then they're saying that if they choose to do something like this, some kind of agreement themselves, then it's permissible, whether you want to call that a prenuptial agreement or the likes, then that is permitted, inshaAllah ta'ala. However, it's not binding, nor is it something which is a must, nor is something no one can force someone else into it. And this is the point. With all that being said, the reason why I wanted to raise this issue in this amount of detail is that this is something that's coming up in our society, and our scholars have decided to study it, and I wish to share it in order to get that benefit out there. Because for these kind of masail, these are nawazil, newly emerging issues, we go back to the ulama, acting upon the verse of Allah, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you surely don't know. 5.7. Now, once they have got married, husband and wife, they are now husband and wife, but they have not yet moved in. What is allowed for them in that stage? Often, the bride and the groom, they get married. Now, they are legally, Islamically married, but they have not moved into their new house yet. What is the Islamic situation there? What is permitted for them? What is not permitted? The ulama, they say, the scholars, that once the husband and wife have done the aqd nikah, they are legally, Islamically, husband and wife. Therefore, it's permitted for them to do that which a husband and wife are allowed to do together. Means they are allowed to be alone together. Seclusion is permitted, so khalwa. They can visit one another. They can go out with one another, i.e. outside. They can travel one another because they're married. All of those things. However, the ulama add some kind of reservations to certain things because of the concept of moving in, the idea of moving in is something which has an impact on the marriage. And what they say is that before the period in which the walima is done and in which the moving in is done, some things are preferred not to be done and other things also are in effect yet. And this is because the concept of moving in, and we already talked about how Aisha radiallahu anha mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ moved in with her in Shawwal, the month of Shawwal. That they say the ulama, then one reservation that they mention, this is from the recommendation from the ulama, not obligation, is that it's recommended or better that they leave off intimacy during this stage. And I'm saying this from the work of the ulama, even though we know many of the cultures today, some of them, they have this principle that before the husband and wife move in together and are on their own independently, during that stage in which they're getting their money together or preparing the walima and the house, etc., that they should not be intimate, i.e. sexual intimacy. And this, the ulama, they mention, and it's important. Some people think it's only cultural, but the recommendation of the ulama, recommendation I say, not obligation. And this is because the scholars, they say that it's recommended. It's permitted for them to do it. It's not haram. But it's recommended they don't do that which can come from it. I.e., if they're not yet moved in, the responsibility of the husband to provide for his wife has not been fulfilled yet. Not to mention that, the possibility of them having a child at that stage, etc., and they might not be stable, as we know that they have not necessarily moved in yet and are on their own 2 feet. And this was the advice of a number of our scholars. For example, Shaykh bin Baz, rahimahullah. Right, so this Shaykh bin Baz, rahimahullah, was asked by a young man about during the period, a man who he married a woman, and they have not yet publicized the marriage. And then they, at the same time, they haven't done the walima, it means. Aqd is done, not the walima. And they had intimacy. Is it haram for them to do that? Or is there any sin? The Shaykh rahimahullah said, ليس بحرام. It's not haram. ولكن تركه أولى حتى يدخل عليها. However, leaving that off is better until they move into together. However, as long as the aqd was done, then there's no harm in it. And that's the fatwa of the Shaykh, taken from Majmu' Fatawa Ibn Baz, volume 1, page 207. Likewise, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, he writes in his kitab, his work, Al-Sharh Al-Mumti', the following point. He says, it is allowed for him, the husband, to have intimacy with his wife, or is it allowed for the husband to have intimacy with his wife, and they have not officially moved in together? He says, the Shaykh, after raising the question himself, he says that if they have done the marriage contract, for example, and he lives in his house, and she lives in her house, and they have not moved in yet together, officially, and have not celebrated that, then he's allowed to go over to her house and have intimacy with her. It's permitted. Or him or her coming to his house is permitted, he says. لأنها زوجته. How? Because she's his wife. However, he says, we see that it is better that they don't. He says we say better that they don't. And the Shaykh's views, then he continues, that it's possible she'll get pregnant, and then the people who have not yet heard about them getting married. Look at the fiqh ulama here. The people who have not heard about them getting married yet may see that later on that they have a child and suspect something haram happened because nobody knows they got married, or at least not everybody, because not everyone was invited to walima. The aqd. Not everyone was invited to the aqd, the contract. And they think badly about them, or they think that they got pregnant prior to the marriage, and etc., etc. The Shaykh explains. And that's why we come back to the hikmah, the wisdom behind the marriage contract, the walima. One of the wisdoms behind the walima in the first place was that people would know that there is no affair happening. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أشيد النكاح, publicize the nikah, هذا النكاح لا السفاحة. This is a nikah, a marriage, not an affair, a fornication. And this is also the fatwa of Lajna Daima, the permanent committee, and other than them. So the reason why I mention this is that we find some cultures, they practice this, and from that angle, there's no harm in it, because the ulama also mentioned this. But is it haram? No, it's not haram. But it's something they best lift up. That's what our scholars advise. And so we want to mention that. Another question also may arise during this time period, while they're married but not moved in yet. They are husband and wife, but then come the questions about the husband's obligations. So husband obligation to his wife and the likes. Truthfully, or the reality is that during the state where the husband and wife are have not moved in yet together, they are still husband and wife, so they need to fulfill that which they can of their rights. But as we'll see later on, some of the rights are dependent upon moving in and upon consummation of the marriage and the likes. So the benefit then is that some rights may apply and others may not. An example the ulama they mention is that the husband's right to have the control of the household, i.e. the final say, the qiwama, and authority, even though he is at that stage he still is the husband, because he's not taking care of her at the present moment, i.e. he's not taking care of her expenses because she's living with her family. Shaykh Ibn Baz rahimahullah mentions on his website on a fatwa that the husband then doesn't have the full authority or the authority to dictate to her what to do or not to do in terms of leaving the house or the likes. Of course, no woman or a man should do that which is haram in general. But the idea is, it's dependent. That right for the husband, that qiwama comes with, as Allah says, مَا أَنفَقُوا, right, due to what they give of their wealth. So from here, in the situation where they have not moved in yet, if they have not he has not fully assumed the responsibility, and she's still living with her father, who taking care of the finances, therefore the qiwama is still with him in the fullest sense. And so later on, when he was assuming the responsibility, then he will have that ability and that right. It's from the huquq, which we'll talk about later. Lastly, I want to mention, once the husband and wife have got married, then they are allowed to proceed to the next stage. And it's important to understand that it is permissible to have a gap between the two, like we said, between the aqd, the contract, and the walima, and the contract, the walima, and the moving in. But obviously, it should be reasonable timing and not excessive, right? In such that it may harm their relationship, as at times extended periods may not be beneficial. But at the same time, it's important to their agreement and their ability And that's what they are allowed to do. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we said 3 years, and we said that it's agreed upon them to decide that point. And in this stage, they can plan the walima, etc., while they are married. Because sometimes some people may ask that when they didn't do the aqd yet, the contract, can they talk to one another? And the idea is, the scholars said they're permitted to speak about that which is necessary only. But the reality is, if they get married, then they can proceed to this full discussions, because now they assume the role of husband and wife. Inshallah, with this amount we'll end. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Next week we'll be talking about the discussion of the walima and its ahkam. And from there we'll also talk about, after that, what happens after the walima. And inshallah, so we'll continue the series on some more of the topics before concluding. If anyone has any questions, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, on that which we said, we will take it inshallah ta'ala. Question says, would you please be able to teach the next book for the fiqh curriculum, Al-Qawaid wa Usul al-Jami'a by Imam al-Sa'di rahimahullah? Yes, we covered before, alhamdulillah, the beginning book on the subject of Qawaid, which was Al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya. And we said that the second level, the book is Al-Qawaid wa Usul al-Jami'a of Imam al-Sa'di rahimahullah, where he expands upon the Qawaid from 30 on the first book roughly to 60. So inshallah ta'ala, if Allah gives us tawfiq, we will do that bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Inshallah ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be able to do that and make it easy. Anyone else have any questions, inshallah ta'ala? وَإِيَّاكُمْ. Anyone else have any questions, inshallah? Otherwise, we'll allow everyone to end. طيب, inshallah. Tomorrow, inshallah, we will continue our lesson on the fiqh of food and drink. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, picking up from where we left off. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.